Amsterdam, 1990. Inside the dimly lit night watch bar of the American hotel, the mood was calm, almost routine. Roy Francis Adkins sat at a table with two Colombian men. The music hummed softly in the background. His drink was half finished. Conversations floated through the air like smoke. Casual, forgettable. Then came the sound no one expected, a single gunshot, just like that. Roy Adkins, once one of London's most feared underworld figures, was dead. No final words, no warning, no time to fight back. For those who knew him, it was hard to imagine this ending. Roy wasn't just another criminal. He was built like a tank, quick-tempered and respected or feared by anyone who crossed his path. In the London of the 70s and 80s, Adkins wasn't just in the game, he was the game. A name that carried weight, a presence that made even seasoned gangsters nervous. And now here he was, lying cold in a foreign city, silenced. But the questions came fast and hard. Who pulled the trigger? Why that night? And why here? Some say it was business gone bad. Others whisper about betrayal, emeralds and enemies, far more dangerous than anything Roy had faced in London. The Dutch underworld. Colombian cartels, stolen goods, secrets. There was talk of a smuggling job involving precious stones, emeralds to be exact, meant for Colombian buyers. Somewhere along the line, a shipment vanished. Tensions rose, trust collapsed. And Roy, who had always refused to bow to anyone, may have finally pushed too far. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another gangster's death. This was something darker, something personal. Roy Francis Adkins didn't go down in a blaze of glory. He was taken out with quiet precision. No grand standoff. Just a single shot in a luxury bar, and a silence that still echoes through the shadows of Europe's underworld. So who was Roy Adkins? How did he rise so high and fall so hard? And why, even decades later, does his name still send chills through old circles of organized crime? The story that follows isn't just about crime. It's about power, pride, and a man who thought he was untouchable until he wasn't. Roy Francis Adkins was born on October 4, 1947, in Hammersmith, West London. Like many young boys growing up in the post-war shadows of working-class England, his future wasn't handed to him. It was built or taken. London at the time was a city in flux. Streets echoed with opportunity, but they also whispered the promises of power for those willing to take the darker path. Roy was one of them. From an early age, Adkins made it clear he wasn't afraid of risk. He didn't wait around for a lucky break. He created his own through force, fear, and reputation. First came robbery. Not petty theft, but serious, organized hits. These weren't the actions of a desperate man. They were the decisions of someone climbing fast in a ruthless world, and Roy had something others didn't. Physically, he was intimidating, strong, broad, and impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just size that made people step aside. It was the way he carried himself. The short fuse. The look in his eyes that said violence was always an option. In a city where many talked tough, Roy didn't need to talk at all. His presence did the work. By the 1970s, his name was circulating in London's underworld. He wasn't the most famous, but he was respected and feared. That fear came with power, and power came with options. And as the decade rolled on, those options started pointing towards something bigger than local robberies. Like many gangsters of the era, Adkins saw the changing tides. The future of crime wasn't in stolen goods or armored vans. It was in drugs, easy to move, harder to trace, and infinitely more profitable. Roy didn't just notice the shift. He embraced it. But moving from robbery to smuggling wasn't just about money. It meant stepping into a global game, one ruled not by fists but by networks, silence, and strategy. And for a man like Roy, quick-tempered and used to being in control, this world would test him in ways even he couldn't predict. He was no longer just a London gangster. He was on the verge of becoming an international player. What started on the streets of Hammersmith was now heading straight for Europe's criminal elite. And with every step, Roy was pushing closer to both power and danger. As the 1970s gained speed, so did Roy Francis Adkins. He wasn't a petty thief anymore. He was something else, something darker. In London's growing network of gangland activity, Roy was carving out a name, one robbery at a time. These weren't low-stakes jobs. They were serious, calculated operations. Some involved violence, others relied on intimidation. But they all had one thing in common: Roy's fingerprints. His reputation as a man you didn't cross was growing fast, and so was the fear that followed him. People talked about his temper. It wasn't just short, it was explosive, the kind that turned quiet conversations into broken jaws. His physical strength added another layer. Roy wasn't someone you wanted to test, because most who tried didn't get a second chance. But even the toughest men knew that violence alone wasn't enough to hold power. Not in a city like London, where the rules were always shifting, and loyalty was as fragile as glass. Roy understood that. And by the end of the decade, he made a move that would change everything. He turned to drugs. This was no accident. All around him, gangsters were trading in the old for the new. Robbery was high risk and low reward. But the drug trade, it was quiet, consistent, and rich beyond anything London's criminal world had seen before. Roy started with cannabis. Easy to move, easier to sell. It didn't take long for him to establish himself as a trusted supplier. He knew the streets, the people, and the patterns. More importantly, he knew how to keep people in line. Through fear, through loyalty, through both. But the real shift came when Roy stopped working with small-time crooks and started dealing with international players. That's when he stopped being a gangster from Hammersmith and became something much more dangerous, a man whose power crossed borders. London had given him his name. But the future, that was waiting for him somewhere else. Roy wasn't just rising. He was expanding, and with each step deeper into the drug world, he was building an empire. One built on secrecy, violence, and an iron will. But in that world, power always comes with enemies. And Roy, for all his strength, was no exception. He thought he could control it all. The streets, the product, the people. But what he couldn't see was that the same force that lifted him up, ambition, was already waiting to pull him back down. By the 1980s, Roy Francis Adkins had grown restless. London was no longer enough. The local jobs, the familiar enemies, even the fast money, it all began to feel limited. For a man like Roy, who thrived on power and control, the only way forward was out. Out of the country, out of the familiar, into deeper, darker waters. That path led him to the Netherlands. It was there that Roy crossed paths with Klaas Bruinsma, a powerful Dutch drug lord with one of the most feared operations in Europe. Bruinsma wasn't just another dealer. He was building an empire. And he saw something in Roy. Not just muscle, not just street smarts, but a man who knew how to get things done without asking for permission. The partnership that followed was unexpected, but lethal. Roy wasn't just another soldier in Bruinsma's crew. He was reportedly made the head of the drug division, a role that came with access, authority, and risk. From cannabis shipments to broader operations, Roy became deeply embedded in an international smuggling network. He wasn't dealing with street dealers anymore. He was moving weight, handling money that didn't just shake cities, it moved governments. For a time, it worked. Roy was back in control, his instincts sharper than ever. But with power came pressure. The Dutch underworld was no playground. It was a landscape full of hidden agendas, silent rivalries, and men who'd kill for far less than what Roy was sitting on. And if London taught him to lead with fear, Amsterdam reminded him that fear had its limits. The cracks in his alliance with Bruinsma started to show. Tensions grew. Rumors spread that Roy wasn't easy to control, that he challenged orders, that he didn't back down, even when he should have. In a world ruled by ego and territory, that kind of defiance wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. Then came the turning point, a confrontation between Roy and Bruinsma inside Yab Yum, Amsterdam's most notorious nightclub and brothel. Details are scarce, but what's known is that it wasn't just an argument. It turned violent, a physical fight. Their power struggle laid bare in front of witnesses who knew better than to speak. And that was the moment things truly shifted. Roy had crossed a line, not just geographically, but politically. He wasn't in London anymore, where old favors and reputation could shield him. He was deep inside a world that played by different rules. A world where second chances were rare, and payback was silent, swift, and final. Still, Roy didn't run. He didn't retreat. He stayed. He believed he could survive it just like he always had. But the Dutch underworld wasn't London. And the men he now stood beside weren't just criminals, they were kings in their own right. And kings don't like to be challenged. The tension between Roy Adkins and Klaas Bruinsma had been building for months. Whispers of disagreement turned into open defiance. And in the criminal world, that's a dangerous position to be in, especially when you're standing across from a man like Bruinsma. Yab Yum was no ordinary nightclub. It was a high-end brothel, frequented by the powerful, the dangerous, and the invisible. For some, it was a playground. For others, a meeting ground. But on the night Roy and Klaas clashed inside its walls, it became something else entirely. The details of what happened inside are murky, spoken about in half-truths and nervous recollections. But what's clear is this: Roy refused to back down. There was a confrontation, a fight, not just a shouting match, but a violent altercation between two men used to getting their way. Roy's refusal to submit to Bruinsma didn't just bruise egos, it shattered a fragile alliance. That night became a turning point. In the underworld, lines are drawn quietly, but when they're crossed, the consequences are loud and final. Roy's act of defiance sent a message. He wasn't afraid of Bruinsma. He wasn't interested in playing second to anyone, but that kind of pride comes with a price. For a man like Bruinsma, power wasn't something you negotiated. It was something you enforced. And once trust was broken, there was no going back. No handshake, no deal, just consequences. From that moment forward, Roy's future was on a countdown. He may not have realized it, or maybe he did. Maybe he believed he could outplay, outfight, or outthink the inevitable. After all, he'd done it before. But Yab Yum wasn't just a nightclub. It was the backdrop to a final warning, a final line in the sand, and Roy had stepped over it. The man who had once dominated London's streets was now deep inside a criminal empire where the rules were stricter and the punishments far worse. And in that world, challenging the wrong man didn't lead to forgiveness. It led to silence. Roy Adkins had thrown down a challenge. And someone, somewhere, was preparing their answer. In April 1990, a man was gunned down in Spain. His name was Charles Wilson, better known to the world as one of the infamous great train robbers of 1963. It was a high-profile killing. Wilson had long since left behind his British criminal past, living in quiet exile on the Costa del Sol. But whatever peace he had built didn't last. A bullet found him. The past caught up, and not long after, a name surfaced: Roy Francis Adkins. Police believed Adkins may have been involved in Wilson's murder. The connection wasn't confirmed. No charges were ever brought, but the possibility was enough to rattle cages. Some said it was personal. Others believed it was business. A long overdue reckoning between men who had once operated in similar circles, now caught up in rivalries that stretched across countries and currencies. Wilson's death wasn't just another footnote in underworld history. It was a signal, a warning that the rules had changed and that old names didn't guarantee protection anymore. If Adkins was involved, he didn't speak about it, and no one could prove it. But suspicions clung to his name like smoke, and for Roy, those kinds of whispers were dangerous. In a world where trust was fragile and betrayal always a possibility, being linked to a murder that high profile only made him more of a target. Not just to the police, but to others watching quietly from the sidelines. If he had indeed played a role in Wilson's death, it would have marked a new level in his criminal evolution. One where enemies weren't just rivals, they were relics, and sometimes taking out a relic meant digging your own grave. By late 1990, Roy Adkins was walking a thin line. His feud with Klaas Bruinsma had shattered any illusion of safety in Amsterdam. But Roy didn't back down. Instead, he stepped deeper into the shadows, into a deal that would become the final piece of his story. According to Sam O'Neill, a former associate, Adkins had gotten involved with a group of Colombians. Not over drugs this time, but emeralds, smuggled, stolen, and high in value. The kind of stones that could disappear through Europe's ports without a trace, only to reappear in a polished showroom on the other side of the world. For Roy, it was a new kind of play, one that combined high stakes with high reward. But somewhere along the line, something went wrong. A shipment vanished. Whether it was stolen, hijacked, or simply misplaced, no one could say for sure. But the result was the same. Someone was furious. Someone was holding Roy responsible. That's when the pressure started closing in. Roy was seen at the American Hotel in Amsterdam, sitting with two Colombian men. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't friendly. According to O'Neill, Roy didn't want to be seen with them. He gave a subtle signal to keep moving. He looked alert, guarded. Something wasn't right. In the underworld, deals with cartels don't end in delays. They end in consequences. A missing shipment isn't just a problem, it's a threat. And if Roy had lost something that didn't belong to him, he wasn't just a gangster anymore. He was a liability. He had made enemies before, plenty of them. But this was different. These weren't rival dealers from London or even Dutch kingpins. These were people who operated by a different code, quiet, ruthless, and final. If the Colombians believed Roy had crossed them, the outcome was already decided. There would be no warning, no second chance, just a verdict and a bullet. What makes this part of Roy's story even more unsettling is that no one really knows where the truth ends and the silence begins. The emeralds were never recovered. No official charges were filed. The men he met that night disappeared just as quietly as they arrived. But in the criminal world, rumors are as sharp as facts. And the rumor was simple. Roy Adkins had stolen from the wrong people, and the clock was ticking. September 28, 1990. Roy Francis Adkins entered the American Hotel in Amsterdam. It was one of the city's most iconic spots, grand, historic, and discreet. That evening, Roy was seen in the night watch bar, not alone but seated with two Colombian men. The kind of company that didn't draw attention from the outside, but meant everything to those who understood the world Roy was now part of. According to Sam O'Neill, who was also there that night, Roy saw him. But there was no greeting. Just a look, a gesture, small, subtle, urging him to move along. No words spoken. No room for questions. O'Neill left. Not long after, a single shot rang out inside the hotel. Roy Adkins was dead. No witnesses stepped forward. No arrests were made. And those Colombian men? Gone without a trace. Just like the emeralds, just like the shipment. Gone. The official cause was murder by shooting. But beyond that, the details stopped cold. There was no confession, no signed motive, no suspect on record, only silence. And in the world Roy had walked into, that silence said everything. The man who had once ruled by fear, who had refused to submit even to Klaas Bruinsma, had been taken out without a fight. No bodyguards, no warning, just a quiet end in a public place. And perhaps that was the point. Roy wasn't killed in a dark alley. He wasn't ambushed in a car. He was eliminated in plain view, efficiently, cleanly. As if to say, this is what happens when you cross the wrong line. After his death, authorities seized $900,000 in suspected criminal proceeds. But even that didn't stick. The money was eventually returned after an appeal by the executors of his will. What couldn't be returned, though, was Roy Adkins. His body remained. But his secrets were buried, and whoever pulled the trigger that night at the American Hotel never came back to claim the story. In the days following Roy Adkins' death, the investigation stalled before it even started. No suspects, no witnesses, no forensic trail to follow. The case faded into the background of international law enforcement, leaving behind more questions than answers. The Metropolitan Police, acting on suspicion, seized $900,000 they believed to be proceeds of crime. But after legal appeals from the executors of Roy's estate, the money was returned. There wasn't enough evidence to prove where it had come from or what it had funded. Behind the scenes, quiet rumors continued to swirl. Some pointed back to the Colombians, others to Klaas Bruinsma, and a few to even darker figures, hiding in the layers of the European underworld. But none of it led to charges. None of it reached a courtroom. Then, in 1993, police began to consider reopening both Roy Adkins' case and the earlier murder of Charles Wilson. This reconsideration was sparked by the assassination of British businessman Donald Urquhart in London, a killing that hinted at deeper connections between old associates, drug money and revenge. But again, nothing stuck. No breakthroughs. No names. Roy Adkins was gone, and with him the truth. Roy Francis Adkins died without justice, without closure, and without a single voice claiming responsibility. His story, once whispered in gangland circles, now lingers like smoke, fading but never fully gone. No one wears his name with pride. No monuments stand in his memory. But in the shadows of London and Amsterdam, he's still mentioned, quietly, carefully, not as a legend, not as a hero, but as a reminder. A man who rose without limits, a man who refused to bow, and in the end a man who disappeared, not into exile but into silence, the kind of silence only the underworld understands.